Hey there, Bryant Cook, and welcome back to the fifth installment of my deck showcase series, where today I am presenting you with my physical copy of my vintage deck, TinkerBreach. Alex McKinley actually won Eternal Weekend with this same exact 75 cards. Congratulations to Alex on taking home the Mox Emerald painting. And now, let's just hop right on in. Let's show you my vintage deck. So we're going to start off with some fetch lands. These are sort of the outcasts of my other decks. So if they're not in Legacy, the Epic Storm, or Modern Lotus Breach, they're in here. And to kick it off, we have Flooded Strands. These are the two that aren't in Lotus Breach, signed by Andreas Roca. These came out in 2014. I got them signed in 2014, so it's been a long time. And I've been told that Andreas Roca only does group signings now. I'm not sure if that's actually true, but you might want to look into it if you're interested in getting their card signed. Moving on, I talked about Scalding Tarn in my Modern video about how Jack Stanton managed to get these signed before he sort of disappeared from Magic. And I'm just super thankful that Jack did get these signed because they were a white whale for a long time. And then we have Misty Rainforest, Shelly Wan. And I picked up the full set of these last year and managed to get them signed in a group signing. Super thrilled with it. Really happy with how they came out. And a question that's come up on a few of my first few videos is, why haven't you gone for the retro frames? Well, fun fact, I'm a web designer, and a part of my job is caring about accessibility and legibility. The old card frames are not very good for that, and I think there's this sort of idea among Magic players that old equals better, and that's not exactly true. So it's not that I dislike the old frame. I'm just aware of some of the flaws that are in it that people sometimes get too much wrapped in the nostalgia aspect of the old frame. I do think the old frame looks really nice for the most part, but it's not perfect, and I think it could be improved. So do I think that like the retro foils are the pinnacle of Magic? No. I am a original print standard pack foil Japanese foil person, and I'm not really interested in getting reprint old frame stuff because old frame isn't my jive. Like, I don't really care about it. So original Japanese foil pack print, that's my thing. I am not getting retro foils if you're going to ask that question. Moving on to this Polluted Delta, I talked about these in my Modern video as well. Each one has a scaling signature from Vince Pross. I don't know why he signed that way, but he did, and I hate it. That said, why is it the Cons of Turk here, Polluted Delta in here? I don't like switching cards out of my decks. As I mentioned, I do have the Onslaught Japanese foils, but, you know, gotta share the love, gotta... no, we don't have to share the love. I'm not spreading them across decks. This deck, I've actually never used this in paper in a tournament. Fun fact, I built all my vintage decks about 2 years ago in paper, and then the world closed. So I've never actually got to use these decks. I've played a few fun games at like a local shop with them, but that's about the extent of it. So I don't use this deck very often, so it doesn't deserve my top tier foils, if I'm being honest, and I'm too lazy to change them. And then down here we have our Urza Saga. I do need to get these signed by Titus Lunter. I actually have cards coming back from Lunter. They'll arrive Monday, so hopefully there'll be another group signing soon and I can get these signed by Titus. But I have 4 copies. The 4th one is listed down below. And it's sort of one of the cards that made this deck work. It gives you a nice backup plan. So the primary plan is usually to cast Tinker. Like, you want to Tinker Citadel most of the time. And then you have this backup plan of beating people down with constructs if they're going to stop your combo aspect. But you also have Underworld Breach, Brain Freeze. So you have all these things that your opponent needs to fight. They have to stop Tinker. They have to stop Underworld Breach, which is you have to fight on a completely different axis than Tinker because Pyroblast and Flusterstorm don't stop it. And then you have Urza Saga that dodges Graveyard Hate and Flusterstorm and Pyroblast. So you have all of these things that your opponent needs to stop. And that's part of the reason why Urza Saga is so good, is because they can only have so many answers, and Saga usually beats the others. So Saga is just a super powerful card in Vintage. And then down here we have our lands that are actually fetchable. I do recommend 2 islands in Vintage. Ghost Quarter really picked up over the last few years. So you want 2 copies of Island just to battle Ghost Quarter. And that's why we're not running a Tolarian Academy, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But I just don't think Academy is actually worth it. A lot of people get too caught up in the artifact aspects of the deck, where I just want to be as consistent as possible and achieve my goals. So that's why there wasn't a Tolarian Academy on our deck list. It wasn't a mistake. It's just I don't think it's actually that good, especially in a deck with as few artifacts as we have. And these are also our Outcast FBBs. I talked about in my Legacy video, the Epic Storm, that I own a full 40 set of FBBs, but at the time I wasn't smart enough to pick a language. I sort of just said, hey, it has a black border, it's good enough. So yeah, these are not German. I believe these are all Italian and these are French. So yeah, I believe these are French. So yeah, I didn't pick a theme. I wasn't smart at the time. Way too late to go back now. These cards are worth way too much money. I am not rich. Despite owning a lot of fancy cardboard, I make a modest amount of money per year. These are all just sort of tournament winnings across the decades and wise investments. And I said I'm not rich, and that remains true. So you'll see a Black Lotus here and some Moxen. These are all Chinese fakes. I purchased a sort of like a pre-con of Chinese fakes off eBay 3 or 4 years ago, and it had power in there, and I just like kept it because I figured, they'll be good proxies one day. And then I built a physical paper vintage deck. So these are all Chinese fakes. They don't even remotely look real, in my opinion. They're just way too dark for the most part. For some reason, the Sapphire didn't scan dark, but it's the same darkness as the other ones. Um, yeah, and if I'm being completely truthful, I don't know if I'll ever play a paper vintage event ever again. And that's because the success of Eternal Weekend on Magic the Gathering Online, they get 400 to 500 people for all three vintage events, where paper vintage at Eternal Weekend wasn't that successful. So I wouldn't be shocked if Eternal Weekend moves to Magic Online permanently. And that sort of derailed my interest in getting Moxen on top of the giant increase in price during COVID on Moxen. A lot of people saw them as investment opportunities. And right now I feel like we're in a bubble. So that bubble's probably going to pop on the Moxen at some point. I could be wrong on both aspects of both the paper play and the bubble, but that's sort of my hunch at this point. Moving on, we have Lotus Petal. This is the one from my Commander deck. I talked about it in a previous video about how it's signed in silver. I really wish I could find another Japanese one signed in black. Actually, I need a full set signed in black. So if you have Japanese Lotus Petal signed in black, hit me up. I'm very interested in them. I'll definitely swap you for at least the one. So yeah, I don't like silver signatures. Drives me nuts, but it's the one I want on eBay. Matthew Stewart's Mana Crypt. This is not the first nice Mana Crypt that I've owned. I did have another Mana Crypt at one point. A friend got it signed for me, but the artist really wanted to sign it in purple, even though my friend asked for black. And I wasn't going to live with a purple signature. It would have driven me insane. So I ended up selling that, buying another one, and getting it signed in black. Made sure that this time it was signed in black. Purple signatures. No. They need to be signed in black. That's just the rule. And I'm very glad with this. Plus, like, when I ended up buying it, it was right after EMA came out. I believe I spent like $125 on these, and now this is like $450, which is just insane. The price of Commander cards is just wild. And Vintage and Commander do share quite a few cards, so don't be surprised at some of the price points there. Sol Ring came out this year. They're actually out getting signed right now. This is a poor Photoshop that was scanned in. And yeah, you can tell because the pixel quality is a little bit worse on it. It also scanned super dark. But I do have two of these out right now being signed by Matt Barrick. They were printed this year with Commander Legends. It's the first time ever that we've had a Japanese foil Sol Ring. I don't like that it's full art. It honestly kind of bothers me. But maybe if they print another Sol Ring at some point that's Japanese foil non-full art, I'll get them. I know that wouldn't be the first printing, but I'm not a full art person. I like my standard frames. I'm super boring as a person. You should probably know that by now. But yeah, I don't like the full art. Top. This is a reprint pack foil, whatever. The truth is, I'm not rich. And the original Sensei's Divining Tops are just super expensive. And for the low price of $40, I was able to get 3 of those. So I decided to go with the budget aspect. It fits the theme well enough where if I ever wanted to play this deck, I could. So that's what I went with. I do need to get them signed by Rob Alexander, which will happen if Grand Prix ever come back, because Rob Alexander goes to tons of Grand Prix. So why ship them out when I know that maybe in a year or two I'll be able to get them signed? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the world will stay closed forever. Tithing Needle, once again, not original print. Mostly comes down to the fact that the original ones are just stupid expensive for a card that is eh. Needle, like, I want to say that the original ones are like 350 now. Last time I looked, at least. And I ended up getting these at the time for like $10 each, and just decided that they were good enough. So, yeah. Plus Anthony Palumbo signed them at a GP, very easy. Manifold Key signed by Lake Hurwitz. The new signature that I loved. I got these signed this at the same time I got my Veil of Summer signed. Love that signature. It's much better than the first one. So props, and we got an upgrade over Voltaic Key, which might make some of you sad, but the unblockable aspect of it does come up with the constructs from Urza's Saga. And then Time Vault. It works well with the key. You take infinite turns. Once again, this is a Chinese fake. This is not a real one. Sorry. I know that this is a deck showcase full of Japanese foils and whatnot, and I don't own real power, but yeah, this card might as well be power at this point. Definitely better than Time Twister and Vintage. And this is a deck building choice that I made on TinkerBreach. 4 copies of Preordain. When you look at traditional copies of Breach, as in the Breach archetype, they all ran 4 Preordain, but the Tinker builds ran 0 to 1. But they ran a bunch of cards like Hull Breacher, Time Twister, Dak Faden, clunky 3-mana drops, and I found that the deck felt a lot like playing 2-card Monty, where you'd have half of one combo but not the other, and you just struggled, and sometimes you would draw like one piece of each combo, and you're like, what is happening here? So I decided to remove a lot of that and just add in more consistency cards. So I know that Preordain isn't sexy as a card choice. These Preordains might be sexy, but I decided that I wanted consistency over flashiness, and that's part of the reason that Alex won the Mox Trophy, or the Mox Painting, because we have that consistency to allow the deck to just do its thing well, instead of just playing a bunch of haymakers. So 4 copies of Preordain was really the glue that made this deck function. Chinese Fake Ancestral Recall. This is the replacement Brainstorm for my Legacy deck that I got after the original one was destroyed. With hard perfect fits, the original one is now fine, and by destroyed, I mean creased. So you'll notice if you compare the 2 videos that the signatures are just different, and it was tough for me to live with. So I ended up getting the original one back, and then the spare one went to go live in my vintage deck. Ponder, once again, I'm not taking cards out of my other decks to support my vintage deck, so my Lore 1 Ponders remain in the Epic Storm. This is a spare Ponder, the original M10 Ponders, so that's where this one lives. The other 3 are in my Pauper deck, where this Ponder actually lives in my Pauper deck more often than it does my vintage deck, just because I don't want to get a 9th Ponder. Maybe at some point, if I find like another Lore 1 Ponder for trade at a reasonable point or something, I'll get one, but it's not on my emergency to-do list. Chippy, Gitaxian Probe, sort of a card that I've wanted signed for a decade or so at this point. Chippy just like hasn't resurfaced since 2012. I don't know if these will ever be signed. I wish that they would be. Maybe one day, maybe before I die, who knows. Come on, Chippy, sign my damn cards. Vampiric Tutor, they got this signed this year by Raymond Swanland in a Mark Aronowitz group signing. If you're interested, Mark's group is in the description down below. You can go check that out. Shout outs to Mark for the great service that he does. And yeah, I think it just looks like a really badass card. The signature, the art, everything about it. I just love it. Lindsay Looks Mystical Tutor, got this signed at Grand Prix Providence a few years ago. I think it looks fine. Mystical is sort of a card that when I started playing Vintage, I put back into Paradoxical Outcome decks, and at this point, it's sort of become stock in them again. But when I started playing Vintage the summer of 2020, or maybe it was spring of 2020. Tutor was just not played at all. People are like, it's card disadvantage, it's bad. But I was very quick to realize that Tinker was the best part about that deck. And yeah, I just decided that I was going to play anything that reasonably got Tinker, and Mystical Tutor fit the bill because Tinker Citadel was just so strong that it was better than doing the paradoxical outcome thing, which I then translated into TinkerBreach. So I am a huge fan of Mystical Tutor. If you see people cutting it, I'd question them personally, but you can't control everyone's deck building. Erica Yang Fluster Storms. I talked about this in my TES video, but when I got these signed by a friend, they accidentally shipped to my previous address, and the people that lived there opened up my mail and then kept these Fluster Storms on their coffee table. I noticed it like 4 or 5 days later. I knocked on their door at 7 in the morning, and they're just like, "Oh yeah, we totally have your cards." So I was lucky enough to get them back, but an awkward situation for sure. Happy to have them home. And they're just a super gorgeous card. Like the signature matches the artwork so well, just like the Vampiric Tutor. I love these cards. Like every time I get to play these Flusters, it makes me happy. And then down here we have the old Lake Hurwitz signatures on these Pyroblasts. The other signatures are in my Pauper deck, but yeah, so if you compare this signature to this signature, this one's just so much better. So Lake Hurwitz, I appreciate your signature, level up game. Respect. And then another Erica Yang signature on Mental Misstep this time. And shout outs to Warren Connell, who traded me, or actually sold me this Mental Misstep. I'm sorry, Warren. The price on these just happened to go up during COVID. So you gave me a really good deal. I'm sorry. At the time, it was fair, but yeah. Just Commander cards in general just went like bananas over COVID because everyone was playing from home. Sort of the world we're living in, but I do think it's a bubble. I think like once the world gets back to having like Magic Grand Prix and Magic larger events on the regular, prices on cards are going to come down. Just because right now people aren't buying and selling. Like, yeah, you can ship to Card Kingdom or whatever, but a lot of people are just sitting on their stuff waiting for the day that they can go to a Grand Prix and dump. Some of the local game store stuff have been a little bit more normal, but for the most part, the online market is just really, really dry. So that's what we're waiting on. Demonic Tutor, Zach Stella. I've yet to get this signed. I feel like Zach Stella used to go to a bunch of events and then sort of stopped. I don't know if Zach Stella signs by mail. I've contacted them a few times and just haven't gotten a response, so maybe I'll slide into a group signing to get this done. It's the only it was the first Japanese foil Demonic Tutor. I know some of you don't like the artwork here. I don't care. First Japanese foil. That's what really matters. So, yeah. And this gorgeous card, I got a great deal on this. I ended up getting this for $100 from the Japanese card group. The person just like didn't want to own it anymore, so I picked this bad boy up. I remember when this came out. I am very old. So when 8th edition dropped, I remember being a young teenager and these things being like $500 because they were just so rare. It was the first Japanese foil merchant scroll, and they've only been printed that one time, and they're not worth that anymore. I'd want to say now they're like 200, 220, but I got a killer deal on mine and then got it signed by David Martin in a group signing from Mark Aronowitz. So very lucky to own this card, and it's just super cool. Another Chinese fake, Time Walk. There was a period where I was testing cutting Time Walk in a bunch of my decks because it was just essentially Blue Explorer, and that's not really a powerful enough effect. I think that sort of changed with having Urza's Saga, because traditionally in decks without creatures or planeswalkers, it's really not that great, but having Urza's Saga, Time Walk just like completely changes both having constructs and the ability to level up your chapters with Time Walk. So Time Walk got a lot better with Urza's Saga and Vintage. Hercules Recall. I got this signed at IllixCon in Pennsylvania probably 6 years ago at this point. It's been a while. And I own 2 more that are unsigned, unfortunately, because I only had 2 from playing them in the Epic Storm sideboard during the height of Eldrazi. So I was like, I'm only ever going to need 2. When am I ever going to need 4 copies of Hercules Recall? Fast forward, I'm now playing Vintage, and Hercule's Recall is just, you know, a super popular card. So a little bit of egg on my face, and I'm sorry that all 4 are not signed. Underworld Breach. I talked about these in my modern video where Lee Siwan, or C, I'm not even going to try. I'm sorry. I'm just going to butcher it. Let's move on. They were not doing group signings at the time, so I mailed these to them in the Philippines. It was like $80 there and back, maybe more if I feel like it was $60 on the way back, and I think I spent like 25 on the way there. So I spent a boatload of money to get my 4 copies of Breach signed. And then they started doing group signings. So didn't feel great about that one. But hey, at least all 4 of them are signed with my black oil marker. A bunch of the newer Japanese foils are a little more sleek. They have a different finish on them to prevent humidity from curling them. And it makes signing with regular Sharpie almost impossible because the regular Sharpie dissolves off newer Japanese foils. So oil markers, Sharpie actually makes an oil Sharpie or oil black oil Sharpie, whatever words jumble, and I use that on my newer Japanese foils. So I sent that along with the cards to get signed. It looks good. The money isn't a big thing in the long run. Brain freeze. Tim Hildebrandt, no longer with us. So Tim's brother Greg does sign every year at AlexCon. I have 2 of these that I'd like to get signed at some point. It'll happen. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that. I got these when I was originally playing Underworld Outcome. There was a period where I was brewing Underworld Breach in Paradoxical Outcome, and it was fine. But ultimately, I feel like the TinkerBreach deck is just a little bit better. I think Paradoxical Outcome is a card that hasn't aged super well in Vintage over the last few years. Force of Vigor was a really big influence on that. And on top of other stuff, it's just the deck's not, or the card itself feels really clunky every time I've tested it. And that's not to say that it sucks. It's just not as good as it used to be. I did a lot of testing with it leading up to Eternal Weekend this year, and I think that the TinkerBreach builds are just a little bit better. Dress Down. This was a recent addition to Vintage this year, and I think it gave you a little bit of extra power in the mirror at killing construct tokens off of Urza's Saga, but it also gave you this really flexible answer against the green-white hate bear decks to blank a bunch of creatures all at once to win the game. So Dress Down is certainly worth the 1 of to tutor for, and then just wreck green-white. That's really why it's here. In my Eternal Weekend events, I never ran into green-white, so it didn't come up, but the card still really overperformed at beating other constructs as well. And then down here we have Force of Will. Therese Nielsen, can't talk. Therese Nielsen signatures, super beautiful. And you might notice these are once again reprints. The EMAs are at least double, if not more, in price than these ones, and the only difference in them was the set symbol. They also have the stamps, so you're literally paying for a set symbol. I figured I would just get the double Masters Forces. They're similar enough, and I love them. Honestly, I do. My thing is original print, but sometimes I make exceptions. I am not filthy rich, unfortunately, so I went with these forces. I'm probably never going to replace them either, like, because then I'd have to get the EMA one signed, and the EMA ones are just super expensive anyway. I don't know. Like, I'm probably just going to live with these forces. They're just so nice. Tinker, thanks again to Warren Connell. Warren, this one did not go up over COVID. Wooch wooch. And that's because it's not available for Commander. It's banned in EDH. So signed by Mike Rabe. I'm glad that Warren sold this to me because Mike Rabe didn't return cards on the last signing I heard. So I don't know if like Mike Rabe's signatures are going to ever happen again. Or maybe Mike Rabe is just waiting a few years to sign them and send them back. I don't know. But happy that I was able to get this from Warren. Narset, one of the few 3-drops I kept that wasn't Tinker. So I cut Yawgmoth's Will, I cut Hullbreacher, Dak Faden, Time Twister. I cut all that garbage. But Narset is good enough to make the cut because even in the matchups where the opponents can't draw extra cards effect isn't good, it is double impulse. So the floor on this card is still high enough to warrant it being played, where Hull Breacher was just pretty embarrassing against shops and Bazaar decks, where Narset still double impulse is fine enough. Colossus Citadel. This is actually out being signed at this very moment. These are scans that I took before it was sent out that I photoshopped in. And Jonas DeRoe. Yeah, Citadel's sort of format defining card. Like before Citadel, Tinker had to get Jar or Blightsteel, and you didn't really run Blightsteel main deck at the time, and Jar was just sort of embarrassing. And then they printed Citadel, and it's just by far the best thing you can be doing. It's not restricted, but honestly, even if they did restrict Citadel, it wouldn't matter. It's just a one of, and it's just so powerful. It is my favorite thing about Vintage, being able to tinker Citadel. It's why I play the format. It's why I love the format. And yeah, this is my love letter to Tinker Citadel. I hope you enjoyed it. And then Sphinx of the Steel Wind. This card sort of became popular this year as a main deck option because it's so good against the bug decks. It's good against Rug, so some of the Xerox variants. It can't be hit by Dak Faden, can't be destroyed by Force of Vigor. It's really good against the Bazaar decks. It gives you a lot of range. Unfortunately, it's pretty bad against the Shops variants because of Stonecoil Serpent. That said, it's still worth playing in the main deck. It's really powerful, and it just wins a lot of games on its own. There's also that Is It Tempo deck that I faced 5 times in one Eternal Weekend, where they just didn't have outs. Like, if they're actually on the Is It Tempo version, they play 0 outs to Sphinx. So they go turn 1 Ragavan, you put a Sphinx into play, and it's just lights out. Playing your favorite combo deck in Paper just got so much easier with the Epic Storm Mini Token Pack. You can pick one up at theepicstorm.com/shop for $13. It includes 64 double-sided mini tokens. That's 128 tokens total. And they include 10 black, 10 blue, 10 red, 5 green, 5 white, 3 colorless, 20 storm counters. That means that you can count your way all the way up to 20 for Grape Shot, everyone's favorite Stormwind condition, a Galvanic Relay Exile Indicator, 4 treasure tokens for Strike It Rich, and then 10 monk tokens for our vintage friends. It also has Slime Time Live, Ave Progenitor Ooze tokens with the power and toughness already built in to make playing in Paper so much easier. No fumbling around with dice, we've got you covered. Make sure to go grab those if you're playing Modern. And then Squirrels versus Goblins, Chatterstorm versus Empty the Warrens, the Battle of the Ages. You definitely need 20 Squirrel tokens and 20 Goblin tokens. You're going to love this mini token pack, I promise. And once again, you can grab that at theepicstorm.com/shop. The Sideboard. Here we are. That extra copy of Hercules that I told you about that isn't signed. There's another one. Yeah, I'm sorry. It is what it is. Once again, dress down for those green-white Hate Bearer stacks. I didn't board this in the mirror. I felt like 2 of those was a little bit too much, if I'm being honest, because not everything is about the Construct War. And I bored out the other Hercules too, so I think having 1 in the main deck was fine for the mirror. Additional copies of Fluster, Abrade. So when Jack Stanton disappeared, he did have 3 copies of my Abrades that were supposed to be out getting signed. I ended up buying back 3 more that are out being signed right now by another artist agent. But in the meantime, I did buy 1 Abrade that was already pre-signed by Jonas DeRoe. So I have 1 that's signed and then 3 that are unsigned. Yeah, so that's sort of what I'm living with now. I don't know why I didn't buy 4 Abrades. I probably should have, so that way I didn't have 1 with like a different signature, but you know, I didn't plan that out well. Is what it is. Lightning Bolts. Oh, I didn't realize this. I own 4 bolts, and 2 of them have matching signatures, and like it's 2 pairs of matching signatures. They were all signed at the same time, but you'll notice here, Chris Muller signed above the line of text. Here he signed in the middle. So I unfortunately scanned 1 of each, but there's 2 copies of each of these with these signatures. It just looks really weird that Chris decided to sign this way. Those are my lightning bolts. I hope you enjoy them. Alpine Moon. I got this for Pioneer, and then it just happens to be a vintage card now because of Ursa Saga, which is kind of crazy. Funny how things worked out that way. I did board it in a few times, but ultimately it never really came up on my Eternal Weekend run. And then we have Yixla Jailer. I think this card's pretty underrated in vintage. It doesn't stop Underworld Breach, so it works well for you. but it's lights out against most Bazaar decks, and because you only have one, they often don't keep in Contagion or side in any sort of Fury effect to kill it if they're on a different Bazaar variant. So having just one is really, really effective against them because they're not likely to have removal for it if it resolves. Once again, I got these from Warren Connell. Warren, you're truly the greatest. Thank you. Blightsteel Colossus. I actually bought this pre-signed off eBay. And at the time, the way that worked is you only get 5 bid offers on eBay. And the person wanted way too much money for it. So what ended up happening is I went back and forth with this person and then ran out of bid notes and then ended up sending them a message. And we came to a price and I ended up getting this for $110 where they originally wanted like $300. But the price on them from Haruya was only like $120. So it's weird how it ended up working out, but I ended up getting it for a really good price and super happy with it. I won a vintage challenge, sold all of my prizes, and then paid with those prizes to get this. Actually, that's a lie. I spent $170 on it. That's how much I spent because I ended up spending more than Haruya had on it. The person valued the signature at like $30 or $40. But honestly, I'd spend that again. This card's just super beautiful. It's even better in person. Needle, we've already talked about that. Grafdigger's Cage. I actually got a killer deal on this one. I bought it off of TCG Player. The person was having trouble selling it through TCG Player because most people don't buy Japanese foils on there. So I ended up getting this for $12 when Haruya wanted $45. So that was a little bit of a steal. I still have to get it signed. It'll happen at some point. I have a bunch of Ooze tokens that need to be signed by the same artist, so I'm going to definitely hop into group signing this year. And then Soul Guide Lantern is out being signed at the moment. I have 2 of them. They'll be back eventually. It's better than Nile Spellbomb because you don't always have black mana. Plus, you get like the incidental value of just like playing it, removing one random card, and then drawing a card, which is kind of nice. So against decks like Breach or Jeskai Xerox, you can remove their Ancestral and then just draw a card later, so that way you don't get bit by the Ancestral, getting back by Mystic Sanctuary, and then they gush the Sanctuary, so you don't get buried by that. So Soul Guide's very, very powerful, and I'm sorry, I don't own a Tabernacle. I used to have a Chinese fake that I sold to a friend, and kind of regret it, because that $5 is not worth me not having a fake Tabernacle. I'd rather have a fake Tabernacle than $5, but they wanted it, so I gave it up. Hi, RJ. All right, so these are the extra cards that didn't make the cut, but I still own for this deck. Hull Breachers. I ended up getting all of these this year. I think I spent somewhere between $25 and $30 each on these. I felt like it was a good investment because even though it's Banded Commander, I think that these will go up over time, even if they're not legal in that format. Another Chinese fake Time Twister, my additional Brain Freeze that I spoke about, Snapcaster Mage. I got this signed this year, and holy crap, is this a gorgeous card. The signature, the card itself is just beautiful. Unfortunately, it was not good enough to make the cut in this deck, but it was pretty close. It was very, very close to making the cut. Pretty much all I have to say about it. Additional copies of Flusterstorm and Pyroblast. We talked about those. We talked about Breach. Dig Through Time. Ryan Yee. Not signing at the moment due to COVID, but I have 5 of these that need to get signed. 1 for Vintage, 4 for Pioneer. It'll happen at some point. Just have to wait it out. World, it opened up for a little bit, but not enough, unfortunately. Additional copies of Yixla Jailer. Shoutouts to Warren Connell once again. Yawgmoth's Will. I talked about this in my... I believe it was my Legacy, the Epic Storm video, but Ron Spencer's the only artist that I send to without asking, because it takes so long for Ron to get back to people on information, where I emailed Ron in like 2014 and then got that information, and every year I just send like some basic lands or whatever to Ron with a black marker, and they just come back a few weeks later, where I think it's actually just easier to get your card signed without contacting Ron. Definitely checks his physical mail more than he does his email. That's what I'm trying to say here. And if you want it signed in black, make sure to send a marker, because Ron sometimes signs in silver on black cards without people asking for it just because the contrast is better. But I like black signature, so I always send a marker. Sprite Dragon. This card was really good a couple years ago, or at the beginning of COVID. Um, and then has sort of fallen out of favor in Vintage. I actually feel like it's pretty good again because all the cards that people play to beat these decks don't combat Sprite Dragon anymore. So like the Force of Vigor, the Collector Roofs, all that good stuff. And I feel like Sprite Dragon would be fine again right now, but nobody's playing it. It could make a comeback. I tested it for a little bit leading up to Eternal Weekend. Ultimately decided to cut it just because I needed other cards to do things. But I do think the Dragon is primed to come back at some point. Lavinia. I did test out white builds instead of Grixis, but ultimately I found that the white builds were a little bit too clunky, so I ended up moving to Grixis so I could get Pyroblast to answer opposing copies of Hull Breacher. That was a big thing. Pyroblast is just really good in the mirror right now anyway, so unfortunately Lavinia left, but I was really, really close to running white for Prismatic Ending plus these cards. The extra copy of Sensi's Divining Top. I do own a third one. I don't know. I think I didn't upload it because it would have required an extra row of one card. So I do own 3 of these. I just need to get them signed by Rob Alexander, as I mentioned earlier. Christine Choi. I actually messaged her yesterday with some advice from a watcher. So hopefully I get these signed soon. It's a card you could play in this deck. It does accelerate you into Tinker, but outside of that, Mana Vault doesn't do a whole lot, so I don't think it's worth playing. And then Tolarian Academy. I had a Japanese one. It's now actually in the shop, so if you want to own my previous Japanese Foil Academy, please go buy it from the shop. I don't want to own it. But I ended up buying a signed one because it was just so much easier to buy a signed one than to get mine signed. Stephen Danielle signs for an artist agent that lives in Italy, so I'd have to send my card to Italy to then get sent to Seattle to ship back and then to ship from Italy to me, and all that shipping gets added into your signature fee, and it was just way too much. So I ended up just paying for the signed one, got a reasonable deal on it, and I'm happy with it. So yeah. Caracas. These are done by Drew Baker, who lives in Rochester, New York, which is the next city over from me. So Drew signed these during COVID. I have one from EMA and then one from Ultimate Masters. I bought the Ultimate Masters one without realizing that the EMA one existed. So I own 2 of them. I have played them in the White Splash version because they're pretty good at bouncing Lavinias and other things like that. But they're not super popular at the moment, but in the right metagame, they could be fairly good. And then we have Urza Saga once again. That is the 4th one, and then a Chinese fake Tolarian, Library of Alexandria. God, I am butchering this video. I cannot talk today. I apologize. And then down here, these are the other deck showcases we've done so far, plus the products that I personally recommend. These are not products that are being paid to be sponsored. These are just what I actually use in day-to-day life because I enjoy them. Hopefully you enjoyed this, even though I sort of stumbled on my words today. Sorry about that. I'm not perfect. Take care, keep storming, and happy holidays! See you on Monday. Hey, Bryant Cook here. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe, but also follow the social media channels down below. If you want to support this content directly, I would recommend going to theepicstorm.com/shop. And if you need a little bit of assistance with the Epic Storm to get to that next level, I would recommend going to theepicstorm.com/tutoring. Don't worry, there's more great content coming right up.